The divorce papers trembled in Alexander Wolf's hands as Manhattan's skyline mocked him through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 2:47 a.m., the exact moment she'd walked out 3 months ago, he stood, alone in his million-dollar penthouse, drowning in silence that cost him everything. Sign here and here, his lawyer had instructed earlier that day. But Alexander couldn't do it. Not when her signature already stared back at him. Jessica Moore, not Jessica Wolf. She'd already erased him from her name, from her life. The crystal tumbler of bourbon sat untouched on the Italian marble counter. Even his favorite whiskey tasted like ash these days. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching the city below continue its relentless pulse. Somewhere out there, Jessica was rebuilding her life without him, thriving without him. I already left a long time ago. You just didn't notice. Her final words echoed through empty rooms that once held laughter, arguments, love. Now they held nothing but regret. Welcome to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, where we share stories that touch the soul and transform the heart. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family of storytelling. Today's tale will shake you to your core, because how many of us have taken love for granted until it was too late? Alexander crushed the papers in his fist. 3 months ago he had everything, a billion-dollar empire, a beautiful wife, who stood by him through his rise from nothing, the respect of Wall Street. Tonight, he had money that felt like chains and success that tasted like failure. His phone buzzed. Another crisis at Wolf Industries. Another fire to put out. Another excuse to avoid facing what he'd become. But this time, he let it ring. What was the point of saving an empire when he'd lost his queen? Here's what's devastating. Jessica hadn't asked for diamonds or designer bags. She'd begged for something priceless. His time, his attention, his respect. She wanted a partner, not a provider. A husband, not a human ATM. But Alexander had been too blind to see it. Too proud to change. Too foolish to realize that when a strong woman finally walks away, she's given you 1,000 chances you never noticed. Now, as dawn threatened to break over New York City, one question consumed him. Was it possible to win back someone you never deserved in the first place? What you're about to witness is a journey of devastating loss and impossible redemption. Because sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what everything really means. And sometimes, just sometimes, love gives us one last chance to get it right. But first, Alexander Wolf would have to do something he'd never done in his entire life. Admit she was right about everything. 6 months before that devastating night, Jessica Moore Wolf stood before her bathroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Another charity gala. Another night of playing the perfect billionaire's wife. Another performance where she'd smile while dying inside. "Darling, the car's waiting," Alexander called from the bedroom, already scrolling through emails on his phone. She fastened the diamond necklace he'd given her for their anniversary, the one he'd had his assistant pick out. $20 million in jewelry adorned her body, yet she'd never felt more worthless. The Waldorf Astoria ballroom glittered with New York's elite. Investment bankers, tech moguls, and old money aristocrats mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. Jessica moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her emerald gown drawing admiring glances. To everyone watching, she was living the dream. "Alexander, your wife looks absolutely stunning tonight," Richard Blackstone commented, raising his champagne glass. "You're a lucky man." Alexander's hand rested possessively on Jessica's lower back. "The luckiest," he agreed, though his eyes were already scanning the room for potential business connections. Jessica maintained her smile, even as Richard's wife, Patricia, leaned in with false concern. "It must be so difficult, managing your little charity while supporting Alexander's empire. How do you find the time?" "Future Horizons isn't little," Jessica replied quietly. "We provide educational resources to over 3,000 underprivileged children in—" "Of course, dear," Patricia interrupted, patting Jessica's hand condescendingly. "How noble of you to keep yourself busy." Alexander had already walked away, deep in conversation with a Japanese investor. He hadn't heard the dismissal of her life's work. He never did. The pattern had started small. Missed dinners became missed anniversaries. Just this one meeting became every meeting. Your charity thing became his standard reference to the non-profit she'd built from nothing. At the Wolfe family estate in the Hamptons, the isolation grew worse. Eleanor Wolfe, Alexander's mother, presided over Sunday brunches like a queen holding court. Her disapproval of Jessica radiated through every perfectly polished smile. "Jessica, darling," Eleanor said during one particularly painful gathering, "I've been thinking. Perhaps it's time you considered stepping back from your project. Alexander needs a wife who can fully support his position." Jessica's hand tightened on her mimosa glass. "Future Horizons has a waiting list of 500 children. We just received recognition from the Department of Education." "How nice," Eleanor replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Still, a woman in your position has certain responsibilities. The Wolfe name carries expectations." Lydia, Alexander's sister, smirked from across the table. "Mother's right. When I married Harrison, I understood my role. Some of us are meant to lead, others to support." Jessica looked to Alexander for defense, for any sign he'd stand up for her. He was checking his phone. "Alex," she said softly. "Oh, sorry. Crisis in Tokyo." He didn't look up. "What were we discussing?" The words died in Jessica's throat. What was the point? He'd just make excuses later, promise to do better, then forget by morning. That night, in their bedroom, Jessica tried one more time. "Your family doesn't respect me." Alexander loosened his tie, exhaustion written across his face. "They're just traditional. Give them time. It's been 3 years. Jessica, please. I've got the Singapore merger tomorrow. Can we discuss this later?" Later never came. The breaking point arrived during a Tuesday that started like any other. Jessica had prepared breakfast, Alexander's favorite spinach omelette, and set the table with fresh flowers. He rushed past, grabbing only coffee. "Board meeting moved up," he explained, kissing her cheek absently. "Rain check?" She watched him leave, the omelette growing cold on the plate. That's when she noticed the envelope on the counter. Their wedding photos from the photographer finally arrived after she'd selected them alone. Jessica opened the package slowly. Image after image showed the same story. Alexander on his phone, checking his watch, looking anywhere but at her. Even on their wedding day, she'd been invisible. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Maya in Atlanta saw the Forbes article about Alexander's new acquisition. "No mention of you, as usual. You okay?" Jessica stared at the message. Was she okay? When had she last felt okay? At Future Horizons that afternoon, surrounded by children's laughter and grateful parents, Jessica remembered who she used to be. Before the galas, before the judgment, before she'd shrunk herself to fit into Alexander's world. "Miss Jessica." A little girl named Amara ran up, holding a drawing. "I made this for you. It's you as a superhero." Jessica knelt down, tears threatening. In Amara's drawing, she stood tall, cape flowing, surrounded by hearts. This child saw her more clearly than her own husband. "Thank you, sweetheart," Jessica whispered. "It's beautiful. You are beautiful," Amara said simply, "and smart, and kind. My mama says you saved our neighborhood." That evening, Jessica waited for Alexander in his home office. He'd promised to review Future Horizons' expansion proposal. She dressed carefully, prepared her presentation meticulously. This time would be different. Midnight came. Then 1 o'clock. At 2, she found him in the office, video conferencing with London. "Just 5 more minutes," he mouthed. Jessica stood in the doorway, proposal in hand, watching him animated and engaged. With strangers across an ocean, while she remained a ghost in her own home. 5 minutes became an hour. An hour became another broken promise. She left the proposal on his desk and walked to their bedroom. In the darkness, she finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't living in a marriage. She was serving a life sentence in a golden cage. The next morning, Alexander found her in the kitchen, suitcase by the door. "Business trip?" he asked, distracted by his phone. "No." Jessica said quietly. I'm done being invisible. He looked up then, confusion clouding his features. What are you talking about? But Jessica was already walking away, leaving behind the diamonds, the designer dresses, and the man who'd never truly seen her at all. If you're watching this and feeling that ache of recognition, if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, hit that like button and share this story. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to disappear. And remember, true love means being seen, heard, and valued for who you really are, not just what you represent. The golden cage was beautiful, but Jessica Moore was finally ready to fly. Alexander Wolf stared at the suitcase by the door, reality finally piercing his bubble of distraction. You can't be serious, he said, setting his phone down for the first time in months. I've never been more serious, Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I've been trying to tell you for years that I'm drowning, but you've been too busy building your empire to notice. Is this about my mother, the gala? I'll talk to her. It's not about your mother, Jessica interrupted. It's about us. About how I've become invisible in my own marriage. Alexander ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, genuineness breaking through his practiced CEO facade. Look, I know I've been busy lately. Lately? Jessica laughed, the sound hollow. Alex, you missed my non-profit's national awards ceremony to attend a cocktail party with potential investors. You forgot our anniversary because the Hong Kong markets were volatile. Last month, I was hospitalized with pneumonia, and you sent your assistant with flowers. His face paled. That's not fair. I called the hospital every day. From the golf course in Dubai, she finished for him. Your secretary told me while arranging my medication schedule. The penthouse fell silent, Manhattan's endless buzz filtering through triple-glazed windows. Jessica watched realization dawn across Alexander's face. Perhaps for the first time, he was seeing the extent of his neglect. Give me another chance, he said quietly, reaching for her hand. I'll do better, I promise. Jessica pulled away, years of unfulfilled promises weighing on her shoulders. You've said that before, after the Christmas you spent on conference calls. Things will be different this time, Alexander insisted, desperation coloring his voice. I'll make you a priority. No, you won't, Jessica said softly. Because you don't know how. The doorbell interrupted their standoff. Alexander's chief financial officer, Asher Grant, stood in the hallway, his face grim. Alex, we need you at headquarters. The SEC is investigating irregularities in the Asian subsidiaries' accounts. Alexander's attention immediately shifted, his CEO persona snapping back into place. I'll be right there, he turned to Jessica. We'll continue this conversation later. This is an emergency. Jessica watched the familiar transformation, her husband disappearing behind the mask of Alexander Wolf, billionaire CEO. It's always an emergency, she whispered, and I'm always later. But Alexander was already grabbing his jacket, already mentally in the boardroom, already gone. For 7 hours, Jessica sat alone in their expansive living room, watching night fall over Manhattan. She'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that today would be different. That today, just once, she would matter more than Wolf Industries. At 1:18 a.m., the elevator announced Alexander's return. He looked exhausted, his tailored suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. It's worse than we thought, he said without preamble. Asher's been embezzling funds through shell companies, millions, possibly billions. He loosened his tie with shaking hands. The board is calling for my resignation. Our stock will plummet when markets open. Jessica felt a flicker of sympathy, but it quickly died. I'm sorry about your company, truly. But what about us? What about the conversation we were having this morning? Alexander poured himself a scotch, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. Jessica, please. My entire life's work is imploding. Can we discuss our marriage issues tomorrow? The words hit her like a physical blow. Our marriage issues. As if her pain was an inconvenience. As if she was just another problem to solve when he had time. There won't be a tomorrow for us, Jessica said, rising from the sofa. Not anymore. Alexander finally looked at her, really looked at her, panic replacing exhaustion. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I deserve to be someone's priority, not their afterthought. I deserve to be valued, not scheduled between meetings." Jessica's voice remained calm, though tears threatened. "I've spent years shrinking myself to fit into your world, Alexander. Years pretending your family's racism was just old-fashioned values. Years convincing myself that someday you'd see me." "I do see you," he protested weakly. "No, you don't." Jessica picked up her suitcase. "You see a beautiful accessory. The perfect black wife who proves how progressive and modern Alexander Wolf is. The charity case you elevated to high society. That's not true." "I love you." "Perhaps you do," Jessica acknowledged, "but not enough to change, not enough to make space for me in your life." Alexander set down his glass, moving toward her with growing desperation. "Where will you go? What about our life together?" "What life?" Jessica asked simply. "You live for your company. I live in your shadow. That's not a marriage. It's a business arrangement." The digital clock on the wall changed. 2:47 a.m. "Please," Alexander whispered, a word he rarely used. "Please don't leave." Jessica touched his face gently, memorizing the features she'd once believed would grow old alongside hers. "I already left a long time ago. You just didn't notice." The door closed with a soft click, not the dramatic slam Alexander half expected. Somehow, the quietness of her departure hurt more. She hadn't even raised her voice. She'd simply gone. For 5 full minutes, Alexander stood frozen in his penthouse, a monument to success that suddenly felt hollow. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall on Manhattan. Inside, the truth crashed down like a tidal wave. He had everything and nothing all at once. His phone buzzed with urgent messages about tomorrow's crisis management meeting. For the first time in his career, Alexander Wolf ignored it completely. Jessica stepped out of the cab in East Harlem, rain soaking through her cashmere coat. The modest apartment building stood in stark contrast to the gleaming tower she'd just left. Her friend Monique had offered her spare bedroom without questions, the sign of true friendship. "Welcome home, honey," Monique said, opening the door and enveloping Jessica in a warm embrace. "You're safe now." Jessica broke down then, tears flowing freely for the first time in years. In Alexander's world, emotional displays were considered weaknesses. Here, in Monique's cramped but cozy apartment, Jessica could finally be human again. "I left him," she whispered between sobs. "I actually left, and I'm so proud of you," Monique replied, guiding her to the sofa. "It was killing your spirit, Jess. Everyone could see it but you." The next morning, Jessica woke to sunlight streaming through thin curtains, and the sounds of life, real life, floating up from the street below. Children laughing on their way to school, vendors setting up fruit stands, music drifting from open windows. She made coffee in Monique's tiny kitchen, thinking how strange it felt to prepare her own beverage after years of personal chefs and household staff. Strange, but satisfying. Her phone vibrated with Alexander's 12th call since midnight. She silenced it again. There was nothing left to say. Instead, she called Maya, her sister in Atlanta. "It's about damn time," Maya said when Jessica told her the news. "That man was draining your light, sis. When are you coming home to family?" "Not yet," Jessica replied, an idea forming. "I have unfinished business in New York." That business began at Future Horizons, where Jessica arrived early, determined to reclaim her purpose. Her staff greeted her with surprise. Their executive director rarely appeared. Before 10 a.m., accommodating her husband's late-night schedule. "We're expanding," Jessica announced during the morning meeting. "No more operating in Wolf Industries' shadow. We're going to seek independent funding and double our outreach within 6 months." Her team stared in amazement at the transformation. Gone was the soft-spoken, deferential Mrs. Wolf. In her place stood Jessica Moore, confident, passionate, and gloriously free. While Jessica bloomed, Alexander wilted. The SEC investigation dominated headlines. Wolf Industries CFO arrested in massive fraud scheme and billionaire CEO Alexander Wolf under scrutiny. What did he know? His company's stock plummeted 43% in a single day. Board members demanded answers. Investors fled. Competitors circled like sharks, eager to acquire Wolf Industries' assets at fire sale prices. Yet all Alexander could think about was Jessica. "You need to focus, sir," Lorenzo, his assistant, urged during a crisis meeting. "The Justice Department is requesting all financial records from the past 5 years. Alexander nodded absently, staring at his phone. No messages, no calls. Jessica had vanished from his life as completely as if she'd never existed. That night, he walked through their penthouse, noticing for the first time how Jessica's absence had transformed the space. It wasn't just her clothes or personal items that were missing. It was her essence. The fresh flowers she always arranged, the subtle scent of her perfume, the warmth she brought to cold marble and steel. In the Home Office, he discovered the Future Horizons expansion proposal, still unopened. He read it cover to cover, marveling at Jessica's vision and business acumen. How had he never recognized her brilliance? How had he dismissed her passion as a hobby? Weeks passed. Alexander's empire continued its freefall, while Jessica's non-profit gained momentum. A generous anonymous donor, not Alexander, provided funding for 3 new youth centers. The New York Times featured Future Horizons in a prominent story about educational innovation. At a downtown cafe, Alexander caught a glimpse of Jessica through the window. She was laughing with colleagues, her natural hair styled in a way she'd never worn in their marriage. Eleanor Wolf had always made disapproving comments about professional appearance. Alexander almost entered the cafe but stopped himself. What right did he have to intrude on her happiness? What could he possibly offer that would make up for years of neglect? He watched her for a moment longer, then walked away, the weight of his failure pressing down on him with each step. The man who conquered Wall Street couldn't win back the only battle that mattered. That night, divorce papers arrived by courier. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to save yourself, drop a heart in the comments. And if you're watching someone you care about disappear into a relationship that's dimming their light, share this video. Sometimes we need to see others' stories to recognize our own, because while Alexander Wolf was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life, Jessica Moore was just beginning to remember who she was always meant to be. 1 month after Jessica's departure, Alexander Wolf sat alone in the Wolf Industries boardroom, surrounded by empty chairs. The quarterly board meeting had concluded 15 minutes earlier with a unanimous vote of no confidence. Though he remained CEO for now, it was merely a technicality. "We need stability during the investigation," Harold Reynolds, the longest-serving board member, had explained with thinly veiled contempt. "But make no mistake, Alexander, once this mess is sorted, we'll be looking for new leadership." Alexander loosened his tie, the pristine view of Manhattan from the 70th floor no longer filling him with pride. His empire was crumbling brick by brick. The Justice Department had frozen several company accounts. 3 executive vice presidents had resigned. Clients were fleeing to competitors. His phone rang, his mother's ringtone. "Alexander," Eleanor Wolf's crisp voice cut through the silence. "The Times reporter just called me for comment. You told me you had this under control." "Hello to you too, Mother," Alexander replied wearily. "Don't be flippant. This scandal is destroying our family name. Your father would be mortified." Alexander closed his eyes. "Dad's been gone 15 years. And he built this company from nothing," Eleanor continued, ignoring him. "Now you've let a criminal infiltrate the executive suite and potentially destroy everything. I didn't know what Asher was doing." "That's worse. A true leader knows everything happening under his watch." Eleanor's disappointment radiated through the phone. "And now I hear Jessica has filed for divorce? Couldn't you at least maintain the appearance of a stable marriage during this crisis?" The casual cruelty of her words struck Alexander like a physical blow. "Is that all our marriage was to you? An appearance? Don't be naive. Marriage at our level is always strategic. And speaking of strategy, your sister's husband has connections at Goldman. Perhaps they could—" Alexander ended the call, something he'd never dared do before. His family, the dynasty he'd worked so hard to please, saw Jessica as nothing more than a convenient accessory. Had he truly been so blind? The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wolf, Ms. Collingwood from Legal is here with the SEC documents requiring your signature." Julia Collingwood entered, her expression carefully neutral. Once an ally, now she maintained professional distance, another relationship casualty of the scandal. "The investigators want these by morning," she explained, placing a thick stack of papers before him. "And the PR team needs approval on the press statement regarding the layoffs." "Layoffs?" Alexander looked up sharply. "What layoffs?" Julia's professionally composed face cracked slightly. "The board approved cutting 30% of domestic staff, effective next week." It was in this morning's presentation. Alexander recalled the slide he'd barely registered while thinking about Jessica. 3,000 people would lose their jobs because he hadn't been paying attention. Again, "There must be another way," he insisted. "Use my personal funds if necessary. With respect, sir, your personal assets may soon be tied up in litigation. The board feels this is the only option to keep the company solvent." After Julia left, Alexander stood at the window, watching darkness fall over New York. Somewhere out there, Jessica was building something meaningful while he was losing everything. The headlines grew more damning by the day. Wolf Industries announces mass layoffs amid fraud investigation. Former Wolf CFO claims CEO Alexander Wolf fully aware of accounting irregularities. Wolf family legacy in jeopardy as stock plummets to record low. Alexander barely recognized himself in the harsh news photographs. Haggard, unshaven, defensive. The media portrayed him as either complicit or incompetent. Neither characterization was entirely wrong. His sister Lydia called only to inform him she'd instructed her children to use their mother's maiden name temporarily until this blows over. His college friends suddenly became unavailable for drinks. Even his doorman's greeting held less warmth. The final blow came when his attorney called. "The prosecutors are offering a deal," Martin Greenwood explained over lunch at an empty restaurant. No one wanted to be seen with Alexander Wolf these days. "What kind of deal?" Alexander pushed away his untouched salmon. "They won't press charges against you personally if you resign as CEO, admit to negligent oversight, pay a substantial fine, and agree to cooperate fully against Asher Grant. They want me to admit I failed as a leader. It's better than prison, Alexander." The word hung between them. Prison. How had his life come to this? "What would you do?" Alexander asked quietly. Martin considered his client carefully. "Professionally speaking, I'd advise taking the deal. You'll lose the company but keep your freedom." He paused. "But personally, I think you already lost what mattered most to you, and it wasn't Wolf Industries." While Alexander's world imploded, Jessica Moore's expanded. Future Horizons opened 2 new locations in underserved neighborhoods. Enrollment in their after-school programs doubled. Grant applications received enthusiastic responses. The organization she'd built, despite Alexander's indifference, was finally receiving the recognition it deserved. "We've been invited to present at the National Education Summit," Monique announced during their weekly leadership meeting. "They want you to keynote, Jess." The team erupted in applause. Jessica smiled, genuine happiness warming her face. "This is our chance to take our model nationwide." Later, walking through the Harlem Center where children's laughter echoed through brightly painted halls, Jessica marveled at how different her life had become. No more silent meals in sterile penthouses. No more dismissive in-laws judging her every move. No more shrinking herself to fit Alexander's expectations. A little boy tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Jessica, can you help me with my science project? It's about plants growing without soil." "Hydroponics," Jessica said, kneeling to his level. "That sounds fascinating, Dion. Let's figure it out together." These were the moments Alexander never understood. Why she'd rather help a child discover science than attend another charity gala. Why teaching young minds to believe in themselves fulfilled her more than being Mrs. Alexander Wolf ever could. Yet despite her professional success, quiet moments still brought unwelcome thoughts. Sometimes, while making tea in Monique's kitchen, she'd catch herself wondering if Alexander had eaten properly that day. When the news reported Wolf Industries' troubles, she felt a pang of concern for the employees whose livelihoods hung in the balance. "You've been checking the business news again," Monique observed one evening, finding Jessica staring at her laptop screen. Just staying informed, Jessica deflected. Monique wasn't convinced. "It's okay to admit you still care about him, you know." "I don't," Jessica began, then stopped herself. "It's complicated. I don't miss the marriage, but sometimes I miss the man I thought he could become." Monique sat beside her. "Have you considered taking his calls?" "And say what?" "Sorry your life is falling apart, but mine is finally coming together." Maybe just hear him out. Closure works both ways. Jessica closed the laptop. "I need to focus on moving forward, not looking back." That night, she dreamed of Alexander, not the powerful CEO, but the man who'd once carried her through Central Park when her heel broke, laughing as they dodged raindrops. The man who'd held her hand through her father's funeral, silent but present. The glimpses of humanity that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. Morning brought clarity and resolve. Jessica arrived at Future Horizons early, determined to finalize their expansion strategy. The receptionist handed her a thick envelope, another donation from the same anonymous benefactor who'd been supporting their new initiatives. "There's a note this time," the receptionist added. Jessica opened the envelope and found a handwritten card. "For the future you always envisioned. No strings attached, no recognition needed. Just a small contribution to the important work you do. She recognized Alexander's handwriting immediately. For the first time, he was supporting her dream without trying to control it, without making it about himself. Her phone rang. Maya calling from Atlanta. "Hey sis, have you seen the news?" Jessica tensed. "What news?" "Alexander Wolf just resigned from his company. It's all over CNN." Alexander stood before the assembled press corps, cameras flashing as he approached the podium. His attorney had advised against this public statement, but some things mattered more than legal strategy. "Good morning," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Today I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer of Wolf Industries, effective immediately." The reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Alexander raised his hand for silence. "While the investigation has found no evidence that I personally participated in or benefited from the accounting fraud perpetrated by my former CFO, the failure happened under my leadership. I take full responsibility for not detecting it sooner." He paused, looking down at his prepared remarks. The carefully crafted statement continued with corporate platitudes about regretful circumstances and looking forward to the company's future success. Alexander set the paper aside. "I've spent my career focused on building wealth, expanding market share, and accumulating power," he continued, now speaking from the heart. "I measured success in dollars and deals. I sacrificed everything and everyone for the bottom line." The room fell silent, reporters sensing this was no ordinary resignation. "3 months ago, my wife left me. Not because of this scandal, but because I never valued what truly mattered. I was too busy chasing wealth to notice I was losing my soul." His voice caught. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. In her Harlem apartment, Jessica watched the press conference live on her laptop, tears streaming down her face. "To the employees of Wolf Industries, I am truly sorry. I've instructed the board to use my personal severance package to prevent further layoffs. To my family, who taught me that appearance matters more than character, I can no longer live by those values." And to Jessica, Alexander looked directly into the camera, as if he could see her through the screen. "You were right, about everything. I didn't deserve you, but I'm trying to become someone who might." The reporters erupted with questions, but Alexander was already walking away from the podium, away from the empire he'd built, away from the man he no longer wanted to be. That evening, Jessica sat alone in Monique's apartment, replaying Alexander's words. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who'd seen the press conference. Maya had called twice, demanding to know if Jessica was falling for his public apology stunt. The truth was more nuanced than Jessica could explain. She didn't miss being Mrs. Wolf, but sometimes, in quiet moments, she missed Alexander, the real man beneath the CEO facade. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jessica opened it to find Julia Collingwood, Alexander's legal counsel, standing in the hallway. "May I come in?" Julia asked formally. Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "I'm here on Alexander's behalf," Julia explained, sitting stiffly on the edge of Monique's floral sofa. "He wanted me to deliver this personally." She handed Jessica a manila envelope. Inside was a single document, Alexander's resignation from the board of Future Horizons. "I don't understand," Jessica said, confused. "He was never on my board." "Until 3 weeks ago," Julia explained. "He anonymously purchased controlling interest in your non-profit's outstanding debt, effectively becoming your largest donor and securing a board position." Jessica's eyes widened. "He bought my organization and immediately transferred all voting rights to an independent trust in your name," Julia continued. "He's relinquished all control. The note explains his reasoning." Jessica unfolded the letter with trembling hands. "Ban Jessica. For years, I tried to own you rather than support you. I controlled rather than contributed. I dominated rather than partnered. Even my recent donations came from the wrong place. A desperate attempt to maintain connection rather than a genuine belief in your vision. I'm removing myself completely from Future Horizons. The organization is now entirely yours, as it always should have been. No strings, no conditions, no Alexander Wolf using your success to rehabilitate his image. I won't ask for forgiveness I haven't earned. I won't promise changes I haven't proven. I just want you to know that losing you made me finally see what I had and what I squandered. With respect and remorse, Alexander." Jessica looked up, her heart racing. Where is he now? Julia's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine concern. "I don't know." After the press conference, he cleared out his office and disappeared. "His phone is disconnected. He told me he needed time to figure out who he is without the company, without the Wolf name, without me," Jessica finished quietly. For the first time in months, Jessica felt not relief or vindication, but worry. The Alexander she knew defined himself entirely by his success and status. Without those anchors, who would he become? "Thank you for bringing this," Jessica said, escorting Julia to the door. After Julia left, Jessica stood by the window, watching rain fall on Harlem streets. Somewhere in this vast city, Alexander Wolf was alone, stripped of everything that once defined him. The thought brought no satisfaction, only a complicated ache. Her phone rang a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" She answered cautiously. "Jessica." The voice was unmistakable, though lacking its usual confidence. "It's me. If you've ever had to watch someone you love lose everything before they could understand what truly matters, this story might feel familiar. Sometimes rock bottom is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild a life worth living." Comment below. If you believe the hardest falls often teach us how to finally stand tall. Because for Alexander and Jessica, the greatest challenge still lay ahead, discovering if love could rebuild what pride had destroyed. Rain pelted Central Park in sheets, driving away the usual crowds of joggers and tourists. On a bench near the lake sat a solitary figure, soaked to the skin, beard untrimmed, wearing jeans and a plain sweatshirt. No one passing by would recognize this disheveled man as Alexander Wolf, who just months ago graced the cover of Fortune magazine as America's most ruthless CEO. Alexander watched ducks huddle under a nearby bridge, seeking shelter from the downpour. He made no move to protect himself from the elements. The rain mingled with tears he'd never allowed himself to shed before. Not when his father died, not when deals collapsed, not even when Jessica walked out. 3 weeks had passed since his resignation, 3 weeks of profound isolation. His phone remained disconnected. His luxury apartment sat empty. He'd moved to a nondescript hotel in Midtown where no one knew his name. His black Amex card gathered dust as he paid for coffee with crumpled dollar bills. A jogger splashed through a puddle nearby, drenching Alexander's already soaked shoes. The man called an apology over his shoulder, but Alexander barely registered it. He was lost in memories, not of boardrooms or business deals, but of quieter moments he'd once taken for granted. Jessica's laughter when he'd finally agreed to try her mother's traditional Ghanaian jollof rice. The concentration in her eyes when she worked late on grant proposals. The gentle way she'd straighten his tie before important meetings, whispering, "Go get 'em, Tiger." The hurt in her voice when he'd missed her non-profit's 5th anniversary celebration for a last-minute trip to Tokyo. A text message from Julia Collingwood broke his reverie. "The board formally voted to replace you today. James Patterson named interim CEO. Thought you should know." Alexander stared at the message, waiting for the wave of anger or regret. It never came. Instead, a strange sense of lightness washed over him. For the first time in his adult life, he was nobody. Not a wolf. Not a CEO. Not a husband. Just a man on a bench in the rain. He typed a response. "Thank you for letting me know. How many jobs were saved with my severance?" Her reply came quickly, all of them, for now. Alexander nodded to himself. At least he'd done one thing right. As the rain intensified, Alexander finally sought shelter under a nearby gazebo. A homeless man was already there, clutching a weathered backpack to his chest. "Rough day?" the man asked, offering Alexander a surprisingly kind smile. Alexander almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that. Got somewhere to go when this lets up?" The question struck Alexander with unexpected force. Did he have somewhere to go? Somewhere he belonged? The hotel room wasn't home. His family mansion had never felt like home. The only place that had ever truly felt like home was wherever Jessica was. "I'm not sure anymore," Alexander answered honestly. The man nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Been there. Lost everything 10 years ago, job, family, house. Thought it was the end." He gestured to his meager possessions. "Turns out, losing it all shows you what you actually need." "And what's that?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. "Purpose. Connection. Someone who sees you, the real you, not what you can give them." The man pulled a worn photograph from his pocket, a young woman with his eyes. "My daughter. We reconnected last year. I'm saving for an apartment so she can visit properly." Alexander stared at the photo, recognition dawning. He'd spent his life accumulating wealth, power, and status. Yet this man with nothing seemed richer in the things that mattered. "What's your daughter's name?" Alexander asked. "Hope," the man replied, carefully tucking the photo away. "Fitting, right?" When the rain finally subsided, Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out all the cash he had, nearly $500. He handed it to the man. "For the apartment," he explained, "so Hope can visit." The man's eyes widened. "I can't take this. Please. You've given me something more valuable." As Alexander walked away, he felt something shift inside him. The crushing weight of failure began to transform into possibility. He'd built an empire once. Perhaps he could build something more meaningful now, if he could find the courage to face the one person who mattered most. In the temporary conference room at Future Horizons, Jessica ended a call with a potential corporate partner. Their latest program, teaching coding skills to girls in underserved communities, had attracted significant attention. Companies were lining up to provide equipment and mentors. "That's the third tech firm this week," Monique noted, updating their donor spreadsheet. "We're going to need more space soon." Jessica nodded, but her mind drifted to the conversation she'd had with Alexander 3 nights ago. After months of silence, hearing his voice had unleashed conflicting emotions: concern, anger, lingering tenderness, and caution. "Are you all right?" he'd asked, his voice softer than she remembered. "I'm fine," she'd replied, keeping her tone neutral. "Better than fine, actually. Future Horizons is thriving." "I know. I've been following your progress." A pause. "Your education model is revolutionary. The way you're integrating trauma-informed practices with STEM learning, it's changing lives." The genuine admiration in his voice had caught her off guard. This wasn't the Alexander who dismissed her work as a nice charity project. This was someone who'd actually paid attention. "Why are you calling, Alexander?" she'd finally asked. "I have a proposition," he'd replied. "Not for us, for future horizons. The kind of partnership we should have formed years ago. Now, 3 days later, Jessica checked her watch. Alexander would arrive in 15 minutes to present his proposal. Her stomach churned with nervousness. "You don't have to meet with him," Monique reminded her, noting Jessica's anxiety. "We're doing fine without Wolf money." "This isn't about money," Jessica replied. "It's about 3,000 Wolf Industries employees who might lose their jobs if the company collapses completely." "Always thinking of others," Monique shook her head. "Just remember to protect yourself too." When the receptionist announced Alexander's arrival, Jessica steeled herself. The man who walked through the door, however, wasn't the Alexander she expected. Gone was the bespoke suit, the power tie, the polished shoes. Gone was the immaculate haircut and clean-shaven face. This Alexander wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis. A short beard softened his jaw. Most strikingly, the imperial posture had vanished, replaced by a humility she'd never seen before. "Jessica," he said simply, his eyes drinking her in like a man who'd been wandering the desert. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "This is a professional consultation," she clarified, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Future Horizons is considering your proposal. Nothing more." Alexander nodded, accepting her terms without protest. Of course, he unpacked his presentation materials, not glossy brochures or slick digital slides, but hand-drawn charts and carefully researched statistics. Jessica noticed his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the papers. "Before I start," Alexander said, meeting her gaze directly, "I want to acknowledge something. I should have supported your vision from the beginning. I was too arrogant to see the brilliance of what you were building here. That failure is mine alone." Jessica blinked, surprised by the straightforward admission. "Thank you for saying that." Alexander outlined his proposal, a partnership between Future Horizons and what remained of Wolf Industries. The company would transition from pure profit-driven investments to socially responsible ventures, with Future Horizons guiding their education initiatives. Jobs would be preserved. Communities would benefit. Both organizations would grow. The key difference, Alexander explained, is that Future Horizons would have complete autonomy. Your organization sets the priorities. Your team makes the decisions. Wolf Industries provides resources and follows your lead. Jessica studied him carefully. "And your role in this would be advisory only, if you'll have me. I've stepped down from all leadership positions. This isn't about saving my reputation or regaining control. It's about using what I built for something that actually matters." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Still, Jessica had been burned before. "Why should I believe you've changed?" she asked bluntly. "Few months ago, you couldn't even make time for dinner, let alone a complete value transformation." Alexander's face registered the pain her words caused, but he didn't defend himself. "You shouldn't believe me," he replied quietly. "Words are easy. I haven't earned your trust back." He gathered his courage. "But I'm asking for a chance to demonstrate through actions what I couldn't show you in our marriage." Jessica felt her resolve wavering. This vulnerable, honest Alexander was the man she'd glimpsed occasionally during their relationship, the one she'd hoped would eventually emerge from behind the CEO mask. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Anything. First, this remains strictly professional. Whatever happened between us personally stays in the past." Jessica maintained eye contact, her gaze unwavering. "Second, at the first sign that you're using this partnership to control or manipulate, we walk away. No questions, no second chances." Alexander nodded solemnly. "Understood." "Third, you need to understand something fundamental. I don't need you anymore, Alexander. Future Horizons will thrive with or without this partnership. I'm considering this solely because it could help others." Something flickered across Alexander's face. Pain, acceptance, and perhaps a glimmer of admiration. "I know," he said softly. "You never needed me. I was the one who needed you. I was just too blind to see it." The simple truth of his statement hung in the air between them. For perhaps the first time, Alexander Wolf saw Jessica more clearly, not as his wife, not as an extension of himself, but as her own powerful, complete person. "One last condition," Jessica added. "You work directly with our students. No hiding in boardrooms. I want you to meet the children whose lives we're changing." Alexander hesitated, genuine nervousness crossing his features. I don't have much experience with kids." "Exactly," Jessica replied. "It's time you learned what really matters." After Alexander left with a tentative agreement to begin the following week, Monique found Jessica staring out the window. "You okay?" Monique asked gently. "I don't know," Jessica admitted. "He seems different. People don't change overnight, Jess." "It hasn't been overnight. It's been 3 months of losing everything he valued." Jessica turned from the window. "You didn't see his eyes, Monique. Something's broken in him, but maybe something better is finally growing in its place." The following Tuesday, Alexander arrived at Future Horizons Harlem Center 15 minutes early. He paced nervously outside, rehearsing what he might say to children who had faced more real challenges before age 10 than he had in his entire privileged existence. Through the window, he caught sight of Jessica leading a circle of elementary school students in some kind of game. She moved with joyful confidence, her laughter blending with the children's. One little girl with beaded braids clung to Jessica's hand, looking up at her with pure adoration. The scene brought a lump to Alexander's throat. This was Jessica in her element, not the carefully composed corporate wife, but a passionate force for good. How had he failed to recognize the magnificence of her purpose? When Jessica spotted him through the glass, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but permission to enter her world. A world where status meant nothing, where human connection meant everything. Alexander took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into unknown territory. With no wealth to shield him, no power to wield, no expertise to lean on. Just a man hoping to learn, at long last, what it meant to truly see others. "Children," Jessica announced as he entered. "This is Mr. Wolf. He's going to be helping with our science project today." A dozen curious faces turned toward him. Alexander swallowed hard. "Hello," he said simply. "I'm here to learn from you." And for the first time in his life, Alexander Wolf meant those words completely. If you've ever witnessed someone's complete transformation, or experienced your own, you know it doesn't happen in grand gestures, but in these small, humbling moments of truth. Drop a heart if you believe everyone deserves the chance to become better than their mistakes. Because for Alexander and Jessica, this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something neither could have imagined during their marriage. Something authentic, built on equal ground. Autumn leaves gave way to the first snow of winter as Alexander settled into his new role at Future Horizons. Each morning, he arrived without fanfare, just another volunteer helping children with math homework or science projects. The man who once commanded boardrooms now sat cross-legged on classroom floors, listening intently to 8-year-olds explain their dreams. "Mr. Alex, look." Dion, a bright-eyed third grader, proudly displayed his hydroponics experiment. The plants grew twice as fast with the nutrient solution. Alexander examined the setup with genuine interest. "That's impressive engineering, Dion. Have you considered how this could help communities with limited soil quality?" Jessica, observing from the doorway, noted the change. Alexander wasn't performing or patronizing. He was present, engaged, truly seeing the child before him. Their professional interactions remained cautious but cordial. Twice weekly, they met to discuss the partnership between Future Horizons and the restructured Wolf Industries. Alexander arrived prepared, having researched community needs and educational gaps. He spoke less, listened more, and never once attempted to dominate the conversation. "The board approved the full funding package," he reported during a November meeting. "They were particularly impressed with your trauma-informed teaching model." Jessica nodded, maintaining professional distance. "That's excellent news. We can expand to 5 additional schools by spring." The team also suggested accelerating the technology rollout, but I told them we'd defer to your timeline. Alexander pushed a folder across the table. "Here's the proposal. No pressure, no deadlines. Your organization sets the pace. Jessica accepted the folder, momentarily surprised by his deference. Thank you. We'll review it carefully. As he gathered his notes to leave, Alexander hesitated. Jessica, I know our agreement is strictly professional, but I wanted you to know, seeing your work here, understanding what you've built, it's changed how I view everything. She met his gaze, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, she offered a small nod. Change is good, Alexander. For all of us, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. For now, that was enough. Winter descended on New York City with unusual ferocity. Record snowfalls paralyzed transportation, leaving future horizons short-staffed during a critical week. The Children's Winter Showcase, where they would present projects to community leaders and potential donors. 3 teachers called out, Monique reported grimly. The subway's barely running, and we have 60 kids counting on today's tech presentation. Jessica surveyed the chaos of half-decorated classrooms. We'll manage. Call everyone who lives within walking distance. As she hung colorful banners, the front door opened, bringing a blast of icy air and an unexpected figure. Alexander stomped snow from his boots, carrying several shopping bags. Sorry I'm late, he said, unwinding his scarf. The roads are treacherous. He lifted the bags. I brought the science kits for the 5th graders and extra art supplies. Figured you might need backup today. Jessica blinked in surprise. How did you know? I checked the weather forecast against your event calendar. He shrugged. Simple risk assessment. For the first time in months, Jessica felt a smile tugging at her lips. Risk assessment. Of course. Together, they worked alongside the available staff, transforming the center for the showcase. Alexander hung paper snowflakes from ceiling tiles, helped children rehearse presentations, and troubleshot malfunctioning tablets. When a young girl spilled juice on her project board, he quickly created a replacement, coaxing a smile from her tearful face. As evening approached, the center filled with parents, community members, and potential supporters. Jessica moved through the crowd, greeting guests and highlighting the children's accomplishments. Periodically, her gaze found Alexander, who stayed deliberately in the background, allowing the children and their work to take center stage. Near the dessert table, Julia Collingwood approached Jessica. Quite the transformation, she commented, nodding toward Alexander, who was patiently helping a nervous boy practice his presentation. He's certainly trying, Jessica acknowledged cautiously. It's more than that, Julia insisted. I've known Alexander for 7 years. At Wolf Industries, he couldn't remember his assistant's name. Now he knows every child's favorite subject and family situation. She smiled thoughtfully. You changed him. Jessica shook her head. He changed himself. I just refused to accept anything less. The showcase concluded with thunderous applause as the children took their bows. Parents embraced teachers, donors wrote checks, and community leaders pledged support. Success by any measure. As the crowd dispersed, Jessica found Alexander in the classroom, quietly cleaning up craft supplies. You didn't have to stay, she said, joining him in collecting glitter-covered papers. I wanted to. He continued organizing markers by color, a small but telling detail. The old Alexander would have considered such tasks beneath him. Outside, the snowstorm intensified. Wind howled against the windows as staff members departed in anxious bursts, hurrying home before conditions worsened. The mayor just declared a snow emergency, Monique announced, checking her phone. They're shutting down all roads in an hour. Jessica glanced outside with concern. Everyone should go now. I'll finish locking up. Alexander looked up from the craft table. I'll stay and help. My hotel is nearby. I can walk from here. Monique shot Jessica a questioning look, which Jessica answered with a reassuring nod. Go home, Monique. We've got this. After everyone left, a strange silence fell over the center. Jessica and Alexander worked methodically, restoring order to classrooms and securing the building against the storm. They moved around each other carefully, maintaining physical distance while completing their shared task. In the main office, Jessica switched on the small electric fireplace, its artificial, flames casting warm light against the gathering darkness outside. Alexander appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of hot chocolate from the staff room. "Peace offering," he suggested, extending one toward her. Jessica accepted the mug, allowing herself to sink into the worn office sofa. Exhaustion from the day's success washed over her. "Thank you for your help today. The children appreciated it. They're remarkable kids." Alexander sat in the chair opposite her, respecting her space. Especially Dion. His understanding of environmental science is advanced for his age. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Jessica admitted. "Curious about everything, always asking why." "I can see that." Alexander smiled softly. "He has your determination." The howling wind punctuated their conversation, rattling the windows with increasing intensity. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the center into darkness. Only the electric fireplace continued glowing, casting long shadows across the walls. Perfect timing, Jessica sighed, reaching for her phone's flashlight. "The emergency generator should kick in," Alexander said, already moving toward the utility closet. After several minutes of inspection, he returned with a grim expression. "The backup system is frozen. We might be here a while." Jessica nodded, surprisingly calm. "At least we're safe and warm." They settled into a companionable silence, watching snow accumulate against the windows. The city beyond disappeared behind a white veil, isolating them in their small pocket of warmth and light. "I never thanked you," Alexander said suddenly. Jessica looked up, questioning. "For what?" "For leaving." His voice was quiet but clear. "If you had stayed, I would never have changed. I would have continued taking you for granted, missing what was right in front of me." Jessica studied his face in the firelight. The arrogance that once defined his features had softened into something more human, more vulnerable. "I didn't leave to teach you a lesson," she clarified. "I left to save myself." "I know." Alexander met her gaze directly. "That's why it worked. Your leaving wasn't about me at all. It forced me to see how completely I'd centered myself in our relationship." Jessica felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. "What happens now, Alexander? When the road's clear and life returns to normal?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know I want to keep becoming someone better than I was. Whether that's enough for you to ever trust me again." He left the sentence unfinished. Jessica considered his words carefully. Trust requires time and consistency, not grand gestures or public declarations. "I have time," Alexander said simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." As the night deepened, they talked with newfound honesty about the past they shared, the present they were navigating, and futures they couldn't predict. No promises were made, no romantic overtures attempted, just 2 people seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. When morning broke, sunlight glittered across untouched snow. The power remained out, but the storm had passed, leaving the city transformed under a pristine white blanket. Jessica stood at the window, watching early risers carve the first footpaths through snow-covered streets. Alexander joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured. "Everything familiar made new." Alexander nodded thoughtfully, like seeing with fresh eyes. Their gazes met, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they had survived the storm. 46 years later, "Daddy, watch me." 4-year-old Amara Wolf balanced precariously on the edge of the sandbox, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker. Alexander abandoned his conversation with another parent, immediately giving his daughter his full attention. "I see you, sweetheart. Careful now." Beside him, Jessica adjusted their son Isaiah's jacket, smiling at the interaction. The twins had Alexander's height and Jessica's determined spirit, a formidable combination at just 4 years old. Central Park bustled with weekend activity, families enjoying the spring sunshine after a long winter. The children's laughter blended with birdsong and distant city noises, creating the soundtrack of their Saturday ritual. "Mr. Wolf," a teenaged boy approached, hand extended formally. I got accepted to MIT, full scholarship. Alexander's face lit with recognition. Dion, that's incredible news. He embraced the boy, who had grown nearly as tall as himself. Your hydroponics project? Yes, sir. They were impressed by the urban agriculture applications. Dion turned to Jessica. I couldn't have done it without Future Horizons, Mrs. Wolf. Jessica hugged him warmly. You did the work, Dion. We just provided the opportunity. As Dion continued toward the basketball courts, Alexander watched him with undisguised pride. Remember when he could barely reach the science table? Now he's revolutionizing urban farming, Jessica agreed. The first of many success stories, their path to reconciliation had been neither quick nor easy. After that snowbound night at Future Horizons, they'd proceeded with caution, first as professional colleagues, then as tentative friends. Alexander had proven his change through consistent action, never pushing for more than Jessica was ready to give. When romance finally rekindled, it grew from mutual respect rather than dependence. Their second wedding, a small ceremony in Jessica's childhood church, celebrated not what they'd been before, but who they'd become separately and together. The twins arrived a year later, unexpected blessings that transformed their lives again. Alexander, who once couldn't spare 5 minutes for dinner, now arranged his entire schedule around family time. The man who had built skyscrapers found greater joy in building pillow forts and reading bedtime stories. Isaiah's getting tired, Jessica observed as their son rubbed his eyes. We should head home soon. Alexander nodded, gathering their picnic supplies. I'll get Amara. Their brownstone in Harlem, walking distance from Future Horizons headquarters, represented their shared values. They'd chosen community over exclusivity, purpose over prestige. As they walked home, the twins running ahead under Jessica's watchful eye, Alexander reflected on the journey. He'd lost an empire but gained a kingdom. The man who once measured worth in billions now counted success in moments. Isaiah's first steps, Amara's contagious laughter, Jessica's hand in his as they fell asleep each night. Future Horizons had expanded nationwide, with Jessica splitting her time between leadership and motherhood. Alexander served on the board but focused primarily on the Wolf Foundation, which funded educational initiatives in underserved communities. Their professional partnership had flourished alongside their personal reconnection. That evening, after tucking exhausted children into bed, Jessica and Alexander settled on their small balcony overlooking the neighborhood they'd grown to love. I had an interesting offer today, Jessica mentioned, curling into the comfortable silence between them. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Oh? The education secretary called. They want me to lead a national task force on educational equity. Pride swelled in Alexander's chest. That's incredible, Jess. You'd be perfect for it. It would mean more travel, longer hours. She watched his face carefully. At least, temporarily, the old Alexander would have objected, would have prioritized his convenience over her growth. The man beside her now considered thoughtfully before responding. We'll make it work, he said simply. The kids and I will support you, just as you've supported us. Your vision deserves a national platform. Jessica leaned against his shoulder, the familiar weight of her presence grounding him, as it always did now. Remember when you thought Future Horizons was just my charity hobby? Alexander winced playfully. Not my finest moment. No, she agreed, laughter in her voice. But look how far we've come. As night fell over Harlem, they remained on the balcony, hands intertwined, discussing dreams and plans with the easy confidence of partners who had learned to truly see each other. Inside, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge they were valued beyond measure. The billionaire who once saw his wife as an accessory had discovered the true meaning of wealth, not in the accumulation of power or possessions, but in the recognition of what truly matters. And the woman who had walked away had found the courage to return, not to the marriage she'd left, but to the partnership she'd always deserved. Their story wasn't perfect. Real love never is. But it was authentic, hard-won, and built on the strongest foundation of all, equal respect and genuine understanding. If something in this story touched your heart today, remember that sometimes walking away is the first step toward finding your way back to yourself and to love that truly sees you. Subscribe to Mr. Roman's Story Vault for more stories that remind us what matters most in this journey we call life. And remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars or status, but in how completely we value those who walk beside us. Because in the end, Alexander Wolf's greatest achievement wasn't the empire he built, but learning to cherish the queen who stood as his equal, not behind him, not in his shadow, but right beside him, where she had always belonged.